Hey, I'm Mitch. I'm one of the pastors here, and you're watching Suncrest on Demand. In fact, you're watching the series finale of a series of weekends we've been calling The Red Letters. I can't wait for you to hear it. Let's get going.
It's really good to be with you today. As many of you know, have been away a little bit this summer. 4 out of the last 5 weeks, our speakers were guys who have started new churches that Suncrest has helped to launch. And I got to tell you, it was awesome to hear about their experiences here. I know you had a good experience. They're all good speakers and teachers. But to hear them say how encouraged they were by you, both in this setting and out in the Commons afterwards, that's just amazing to me. And then I got to do a few things over the course of July, one of which, maybe some of you saw my pictures in the email today, was to go out to Wyoming on a spiritual retreat with some other pastors. I got to ride a horse. Look at this. So I've done trail rides before, right? Because my daughter likes to ride horses. We go on vacation. But I've never done a trail ride where the person in charge is like, hey, would you like some cowboy boots? And would you like a cowboy hat? And I'm like, yes, I would. I would like to fit the part. So we were listening to the safety talk that they have to do, and she was explaining everything. I'm like, oh, I got this, I'm good. And then she's like, all right, you ride this horse, you ride this horse, you ride. And I'm walking over to my horse, and the ranch hand, who was her helper, came up to me, put his arm around me, and he said, hey, you can wear that hat however you like, but you have it on backwards right now. I'm like, oh, I'm killing it. I am killing it here. So it's been a really good summer for me, and it's been awesome to kind of see what's happening here. You know, a lot of times in July, our attendance drops and dips, and people are traveling, all those sorts of things. That actually hasn't happened at all this summer, and I'm very grateful for everyone being here, but I also think it bodes well for the season to come. There are so many new people around here right now, and it's just awesome to me. Next week, we're starting this series called Grown Up Prayers, and I can't wait to teach it to you because a lot of us were taught to pray as children, but there's a different version of how to pray if you're open to it. When you get to a stage of life where you can handle some more things, you can picture God in some more sophisticated ways. And over the next 4 weeks, I can't wait to lay that out for you. But it's not just a teaching series. It is a series where we hope everyone at our church, every single person, will get into one of these discussion groups. And even if it's a little inconvenient for you and you have to shift some things around, you know, having some friends here, being involved relationally, that's what this is about. So I can't wait for next week. But today, we're finishing our Red Letters series. It's been 7 weeks long. I taught the first week, the middle week, and now the final week of it. And I've been trying to say this, of course, through the whole series. Everything we do is centered in Jesus. That's not just this series. That's who Suncrest is as a church. We always go to Jesus to try to figure out, all right, how are we supposed to live this life? How are we supposed to guide our church? What is he calling us to do? And of course, when people encountered Jesus' words as he was saying them, they experienced lots of things. I'll give you this list again. They were fascinated. They were challenged. They were offended sometimes. They were inspired. They were set free. Ultimately, they were changed. And this is really important for us because I think when you and I read the red letters of Jesus in the scriptures, I hope that we are also all of those things. In my email today, I hope you got this, in the PS section, there was a link to a Bible reading plan that's just 11 days long. If you haven't been like a person who reads the Bible before, this would just be a great place to start. Again, about red letters, just the words of Jesus. But sometimes I do have to step back and think the way we experience his words when we're reading them probably is not exactly the same way people experienced his words as they were listening to him, because they were in a different situation than we are in. And one of the most fascinating things to me about Jesus is he gives us some commands that in some ways sound like the 10 Commandments from the Old Covenant sound. You know, the 10 Commandments are like, do not lie, do not steal, do not murder. Lots of do nots in there. But Jesus's do not commands were a little bit different. He would say things like, do not worry. Do not be afraid. do not doubt. And it's interesting, as people heard those words of Jesus, I think they were fascinated by him. The people who were listening to him in real time, they were fascinated by them, but they actually didn't do them. I mean, read the story, right? He says, do not worry, and then they worried. He said, do not doubt, and then they doubted. He said, do not be afraid, but they were scared all the time until they had an experience with Jesus where they saw him rise from the dead. And that is why Christianity fundamentally is a resurrection faith. And then after they saw the man who had taught them overcome death itself, then they did not worry, and they did not doubt, and they were not afraid. But there is one command in this kind of framework of commands that Jesus gave to his followers that I think is actually the most quoted command that Jesus gives. And one of the reasons it's the most quoted command is because people who read the Bible quote it, but maybe more than any other command of Jesus, people who aren't followers of Jesus love to quote this verse. In fact, people who aren't followers of Jesus, and maybe that's you today, actually love to quote this verse to people who are followers of Jesus to essentially say, back off, right? They're like, didn't Jesus say, and here it is, do not judge. We should just all say that out loud together. Let's say it. Do not judge. You've experienced this, right? Where you've had someone say to you, hey, do not judge. And maybe you've said to someone else, do not judge. It's just kind of the nature of this command. And to help us all understand it kind of in its context, I think this is kind of a modern way of saying it. I think you'll get this. He's essentially saying, do not size me up and write me off. Nobody likes that. Do not size me up. And do not write me off. And you've seen people, sometimes when you meet them, it's almost as if they're just doing their assessment. They're sizing you up, and then they're deciding, are you going to be the kind of person I'm going to hang out with, or are you not going to be the kind of, are we going to be friends, or are we not going to be friends? I size you up, and I potentially write you off, and Jesus says, don't do that. Do not judge. And I think this is really important for us because we're in what most people would call a religious setting. And it is interesting that it tends to be religious people who have the reputation for being so judgmental. So we should just ask this question. Why are religious people so judgmental? And let's all think about it together. If you think about it historically, I think judgmentalism is baked into certain religions. By their very nature, many religions are marked by commands and rules and rituals, and you're expected to follow those things. In the Old Covenant, the Old Testament, before Christ came, Judaism had the 10 Commandments. And then all the religious leaders got together and they took those 10 commandments and they created what's called the mitzvah, and it turned into 613 commandments or rules that you were supposed to follow. And religious people love rules, and if you can get your mind around the rules, then you can start to understand whether you're in or you're out, whether I'm good or whether I'm bad. And if you're someone who's good at following the rules, then there's almost an instinct inside of us to be like, and you're not. I think that's why religious people tend to be judgmental. I grew up in a religious home. And, I don't know if this sounds like bragging, but I was pretty good at following the rules. And after I figured out that I was pretty good at following the rules, I started to notice all the people who weren't following the rules. And I got pretty judgmental toward them. It's almost like it's baked into the religious system that has laws and rules and is focused in that way. But you remember the 10 commandments from the Old Covenant are things like do not lie and do not steal. They're rules. But Jesus' do not commands are different than that. They're like, do not worry. Do not doubt. Do not be afraid. And it's as if Jesus was introducing something else, something that was redemptively based, not rules based. And this is what's so wild for me. Because from time to time, I can still go back to kind of my old way and be a religious person who's judgmental toward others. But I really have had experiences with God that I think have reshaped me to be a person who appreciates that Christianity, at least, is redemptively based, not rules based. And you know what I find now? I find that when I encounter religious people, when I encounter some real strong, fundamental church people, they judge me because I'm not judgmental enough toward the people that aren't following the rules. I'm like, wow, there's a system there. So what's underneath it? Well, underneath it, of course, is a little bit of self-righteousness. When I think I'm following the rules and you aren't, I puff myself up and I push you down a little bit. But I think even underneath the self-righteousness is jealousy, actually. Because sometimes religious people who are following the rules look around and we see people who aren't following the rules and they sure seem to be getting away with it. Life still seems pretty good for them. They seem to be making lots of money and having the life they want. They seem pretty happy. And there's something I think that stirs inside of religious people that was like, it's not supposed to work that way. I'm following the rules. I should get it. Why are they getting it? Why aren't they getting in trouble for that? And it's so wild to me. I actually have a pastor friend, some of you have heard me say this before, who says, if sin isn't fun, you're doing it wrong. If sin isn't fun, you're doing it wrong. And I think the sense is from some religious people, like, they're sinning, they're having fun. I'm following the rules, I'm not having any fun. I'm kind of frustrated about that. So it's in that context that I think those of us who are trying to work out what it looks like to follow Jesus or wonder whether we would follow Jesus, we hear Jesus say, do not judge. But of course, he didn't just stop with that phrase. He goes on. He says, do not judge, or you too will be judged. Oh, he's throwing a little bit of an extra layer in this. Do not judge, or else you'll be judged. Don't be judged, or you'll get something coming back at you. I mean, a little bit ago, we just all said, do not judge out loud together. But can we just say this opening sentence up to this period together? Let's just say it together out loud. Do not judge, or you too will be judged. Now, here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to ask you to take your finger and wag it a little bit and say this all out loud again. Can we all do this together? I mean, get your finger. You got to point at somebody, right? Here we go. Do not judge, or you too will be judged. Yeah. Now we're talking. Now we're talking. And Jesus says, for in the same way you judge others, you'll be judged. And actually with the measure that you use, it will be used to judge you. And I'm like, oh, that seems like a really healthy qualifier, right? It's not just do not judge. It's like, okay, this is a framework. We can actually maybe ask the question how. And this is the answer to the question how. How are you supposed to judge people? Well, you judge others as you want to be judged. And maybe you even hear it like I heard it when I wrote this down. Like, that's the golden rule. That's a teaching of Jesus. It's Jesus said, do unto others as you would want them to do unto you. You should judge others as you would want them to judge you. And we could just all ask the question, how do I want people to judge me? And the answer is, I do not want you to judge me. But if you are going to judge me, I want you to judge me mercifully. I want you to take into account the situation of my life. And don't you want the same thing? I want you to appreciate the circumstances that have had to be overcome, the family that potentially you grew up in, the divorce that you went through, the temptations that you're individually prone and accustomed to, the insecurities that you have. Would you take all that into account if you're going to judge me? And I'll do the same for you. There's some wisdom in this. To say, hey, the same way that I would like to be judged, let's make sure if I'm judging someone else, I do it with mercy and taking into account their situation, just as I would want them to take into account mine. So then Jesus asks a question. He says, why do you look at the speck of sawdust in your brother's eye and pay no attention to the plank in your eye? Now, Jesus did not wait for a response, but that doesn't mean there isn't a response. I mean, why is it that you look at the speck of sawdust in your brother's eye and you don't pay any attention to the 2x4 that's in your eye? Why do we do that? And the answer is, because it feels better than paying attention to what's wrong with me. If I could look over and kind of give a side eye to someone else, and I can see what's wrong with their life, then I don't have to pay attention to what's wrong with my life. And I can kind of give my focus. I can be dismissive. I can justify my behaviors if I can notice there's something wrong with you. I don't have to pay attention to what's wrong with me. How can you say to your brother, let me take the speck out of your eye, when all the time there's a plank in your own eye. You hypocrite. And there it is. I mean, this is exactly when people say, do not judge. When people who aren't followers of Jesus talk to people who are followers of Jesus, they're essentially saying this: you hypocrite. You're judging me. And it's interesting, isn't it? We all know what a hypocrite is. It's someone who dismisses their own shortcomings. It is the self-righteous person and emphasizes your shortcomings. It's someone who is preoccupied with your mess and not even aware of their own mess. How hypocritical is that? And so, as Jesus is calling out the hypocrites, I think among his followers, at least among me as I'm kind of reading this passage, there's a hypothesis that's forming. And this is the hypothesis. Maybe Jesus is saying, you know what? Just mind your own business. Just mind your own business. I got my mess. You got your mess. Just mind your own business. You don't have to talk to me about mine. I won't talk to you about yours. Wouldn't the world be a better place if we just left each other alone? Well, it seems like enough. If the hypothesis is true, I could pray and we could go, and the message is, mind your own business. But Jesus keeps speaking. And when he says, you hypocrite, it's not a period. It's a comma. And this is what he says. You hypocrite, first take the plank out of your own eye. And maybe you can start to see what Jesus is saying. He's saying, well, maybe it sounds good at first to mind your own business. You're messed up, you keep your mess. I'm messed up, I keep my mess. But if you keep your mess and I keep my mess, nobody ever gets better. It actually doesn't move the world toward redemption in the way that Christ would want us to move it there. So mind your own business doesn't quite work. So he's going to give us in order here. He says, first, take the plank out of your own eye. Take the plank out of your own eye. And then you can start to think, well, okay, I think maybe I'm seeing what Jesus is saying here. He's saying maybe that when you see your mess, when I see your mess, I should notice it, and I should appreciate it, and I should stop and think, well, maybe their mess is actually something that I have going on in my life, and this is the hypothesis. Jesus is saying, learn from others so that you can grow. You know, I've said essentially this thing to my kids. I say it to our staff all the time. Like, should we learn from our mistakes? Yes, we should. You know what's even better? Learning from someone else's mistakes before we make the mistake. Let's learn from others' mistakes so that we can grow. Maybe when I notice something that's wrong in your life, it helps me reflect a little bit about the plank that's in my eye. And it triggers something. It prompts something. It reminds me. And it causes me to grow. When you see someone put something online and you're like, oh, that was a bad choice. Why'd you post that on Facebook or Twitter or whatever it is? When you see someone do that, maybe it's the right prompt to be like, but you know what? Sometimes I'm tempted to do that. Actually, last week I did something similar. You know what? I got to go fix that. I'm going to get better based on your mistake. When you see a boss treat his employees terribly and you're watching it, you see that. And maybe the right thing is to say like, you know what? That's a reminder to me as a boss. I need to make sure I don't do that. I want to be a better boss than that. Your mess helps me. Ladies, maybe you're talking to another lady. You hear her kind of denigrate her husband in public. And when you see it, you're like, ooh, that doesn't feel good. But I do remember last week I was talking to my mom and I kind of did that same thing to my husband. Maybe this is the hypothesis. Can I sing you the hypothesis? You can see clearly now, the plank is gone. That was terrible. We'll leave Jess to leading the worship around here. And I think that's an interesting thought. That's an interesting thought. But it's only what Jesus said first. And there's a problem with it. Because if the message of Jesus is everybody just mind their own business, that's what do not judge must mean, just mind your own business. Nobody gets better. And if the message from Jesus is, you know what? Notice what's wrong in someone else's life and don't go judge them, but apply it to yourself and you'll get better. Then you get better. It's good for you. But I don't know if you know this about the way that Jesus teaches us. There is nowhere in the whole scope of all the things Jesus teaches you to say, you know what my way is about? My way is about something that's good for you and leaves everyone else out to dry. That's not what it is. And so Jesus leans in to something that is going to be uncomfortable and potentially transforming. He says, take the plank out of your own eye, and then you will see clearly to remove the speck from your brother's eye. And Jesus, in the context of saying, do not judge, and that matters, is also commanding us to speak into someone else's mess, to see the destructive patterns that someone has and say, I'm not just going to mind my own business. I'm not just going to let it be. I'm not just going to take a lesson from their life, let them continue down that path, but make myself better. Now, most of us are very uncomfortable with this. Why? Because the way that we have seen this done is often inappropriate, disrespectful, and in a group. You get judgmental towards someone, you call someone out, you decide you're going to try to speak into someone's life, and you do it in ways, or someone's done it to you in a way that's inappropriate, that's disrespectful, and in a group. But Jesus has a vision for this. He says a true friend, actually the term he uses is brother, would find a way to do it appropriately, respectfully, and I think individually, not at Christmas dinner, to bring up to someone the mess of their life, the sin of their life, and lean into it in an effort to help them be better. Just because this is often done insensitively does not mean that it's insensitive to speak into someone's destructive path and help them find a better way. The very way of Jesus, I think the cornerstone of his new covenant that replaced the old covenant and set redemption on course, is when Jesus said this in John 13. He said, a new command I give you, love one another. And here's the threshold. As I have loved you, so you love one another. And so we look at how Jesus loved people. And what you'll find is that Jesus would routinely speak into somebody's mess. He would call them out of a certain behavior. He would walk that road with them toward redemption. He would do it appropriately. He would do it respectfully. And most of the time he would do it individually. But the one thing he wouldn't do is not do it. You see, do not judge does not equal do not confront. Do not judge does not equal do not care. And do not judge does not equal do not act. that if I love somebody, that very love would forbid me from sizing them up and writing them off. So, to wrap this up today, I want to create 3 scenarios, or I'll call them 3 audiences in the room. It's possible there's people in this room who fit none of these audiences. I think unlikely, but it's possible. It's possible that you will fit more than one of these audiences. And so let me just describe the 3 audiences that I think come out of Jesus' teaching here and kind of how we should think about them. Audience number 1, I size people up and I write them off. And I do it with a little arrogance. This is the self-righteous person. This is the religious person who is following the rules. I mean, there's some common characteristics between these kind of people. They tend to be people who haven't made massive mistakes in their life. They tend to be people who are older sometimes. They tend to be people who lack some awareness about how they relate to other people. And I just want us all to sit for a moment and say, is it possible that's me? Is it possible the people who are across the table from you in meetings and across the room from you at home and across town from you, that they experience you this way? That you size people up, and you write them off, and you look down your nose at them. If this is you, there is one move, and that is to repent. This is why Jesus said, do not judge. Because judgmentalism is no way for a follower of Jesus. And if you see someone else's sin and it makes you self-righteous, if it makes you angry toward them, if it causes you to avoid them or walk away, I'm suggesting that you're living a different life than Jesus did. That when Jesus saw other people's sin, it did not lift him up, it broke his heart. Like it bothered him. He saw where that life would take them. And it bothered him. So maybe this is you or maybe it isn't you. If it is, today's a great occasion to repent. Second, some of us are people who say, I size people up and I write them off, not arrogantly, but carelessly. I don't look down my nose at them. I'm not a self-righteous person. I'm not judgmental in the way that we think about that word. But when I notice something that's off in their life, I don't care enough to speak up to them. There are some characteristics of people who are like this. Chances are you can possibly relate to what they've done. Maybe you were in a spot in life once where they're now in this spot and you're like, I don't want to be judgmental. I don't want to look down my nose at them. And so you just leave them alone. There's a problem with this. The problem is that you have somehow equated not judging with not caring. You potentially were on the receiving end of someone being insensitive toward you, and so you can't picture a way that's actually sensitive to speak into someone else's life. But you perhaps have actually been able to take the plank out of your eye, and there's someone waiting for you to take the speck of dust out of their eye, and you've opted out. And so the move, if you're in this audience, is to confront respectfully, appropriately, and individually. Now, I'm a pastor, right? So I've done this many times. I've stepped into a conversation with someone whose life was off in the wrong way, and my voice in their life is an effort to say, hey, I need to talk to you about this. This isn't right. It's not going to serve you well or people around you well. I'm asking you to set a new course. And my experience, as many of you have, is often that someone will say to me, Greg, that's none of your business. That's none of your business. And I just have to say, hey, you know what? I'm going to have to disagree. I care a lot about you. And I think it is my business. Now, you might look at me and think, well, Greg, I know how I'm going to do this. I'm going to call the church and have you talk to them all the time. But the thing about this passage, and it's right there, it doesn't say, hey, pastors. It says, brothers, sisters, the body, followers of Jesus together. Let's make sure we're speaking in to each other's lives. And there's a third audience. This is a little bit different. You might be a person who says, I've been sized up, so I wrote them off defensively. I've been the person who said, don't judge me. Mind your own business. That's none of your business. Stay out of my life. What do you know? You haven't lived in my shoes. And someone tried. They tried to speak into your life. They tried to confront you. And they probably did it imperfectly. I don't think I've ever seen anyone do it perfectly. The very nature of these conversations is that we are going to stumble over our words and get the tone a little bit wrong and be misunderstood. And I just want you to know that if you've ever been defensive when someone has tried to come and help you see something to make life better for you and for those around you, and your mechanism was to push them away, then what you've probably found is your future is just going to look an awful lot like your past. The damage that's behind you only mirrors the damage that's ahead of you. And I want to ask you if today could be a day that says, you know what, I'm open to it. I'm open to it. So before we go, I've decided on my kind of first weekend back after the summer, I'm like, let's just make this really uncomfortable. What do you think? Let's make this public. I'm not going to make anybody stand up, but I am going to ask you to raise your hands. I'm going to go through these 3 lists, and whichever lists apply to you, I just want to ask you to raise your hand. And when you raise your hand, it's a step. It's a spiritual step that acknowledges something is true, and it's at least the beginning of saying, I want it to be different. So, if you'd be bold enough, let's start with number 1. How many people in here would say, yeah, that's me. I size people up and I write them off arrogantly. Would you raise your hands? Keep them up if you don't mind. I respect you for raising your hand. If you would notice that and you would repent from that and you would let things break your heart instead of harden your heart, man, not only is life going to be better for you, it's going to be better for those around you. Say, that's me. How about the second group? I size people up and I write them off carelessly. Yeah. I respect you raising your hands. I mean, it's possible that even as I was describing this, there were names and faces that were coming to mind for you, right? Like, you know someone whose life is a mess, and you know you've kind of tapped out instead of stepping in. And I want to really encourage you to say, you know what, I'm going to step in appropriately, respectfully, and individually. I'll take that step. Third, I've been sized up So I wrote them off defensively. How many of us? Yeah. Today can be the beginning of something new. Out of all the groups that raise their hand, I might respect you the most because you'd probably be the most prone not to raise your hand. To admit that something is off. And today you did. So, my prayer in the spirit of Jesus' teaching is that you would listen. You'd listen. When your spouse, when your parents, when your kids, when your boss, when your sister, when the guy who leads your small group, they come to you and say, hey, can we talk about that? That you would listen.
Next weekend, Thursday and Sunday morning, we are going to be doing some amazing stuff. There's going to be awesome opportunities to celebrate being back to school for your kids, which may or may not feel like a celebration. There's going to be Vito's Italian ice available all weekend long. We're kicking off a brand new series of messages that we're calling Grown Up Prayers, and there's going to be an opportunity for you to find your people right here at Suncrest. Listen, I know that back to school time can be full of confusion, full of choices, so let me help you make one of the easiest choices you can. Join us next week at Suncrest for an amazing kickoff for back to school. We'll see you then.
Will your grace run out if I let you down? 'Cause all I know is how to run. I am a sinner. If it's not one thing, it's another. Caught up in words, tangled in lies. You are a savior, and you take brokenness aside and make it beautiful, beautiful. Will you call me child if I tell you lies? 'Cause all I know is how to cry. I am a sinner. If it's not one thing, it's another. Caught up in words, tangled in lies. You are a savior, and you take brokenness aside and make it beautiful, beautiful. You make it beautiful. You make it beautiful. You make it beautiful. You make it beautiful. 'Cause I am a sinner. If it's not one thing, it's another. Caught up in words, tangled in lies. And you are a savior, and you take brokenness aside and make it beautiful, beautiful. Yeah, I am a sinner. If it's not one thing, it's another. Caught up in words,
Every week we pause everything we do both in person and on demand to focus on the love of Jesus through a time called communion. It's where we take bread and juice in person, but whatever you have available to eat and drink on demand to represent Jesus' body and his blood that was broken and poured out for us so that we might know what real love and real life look like. For those of us who follow Jesus, it's meant to refuel and refocus us on Jesus and the work that he has called us to be used by God to change lives. Maybe you're watching this video and you're still exploring what you believe. I want you to know that Suncrest is a safe place for you to ask your questions, to wonder what this is all about, and to do it alongside other people who are figuring out as well. In a moment, I'm going to put a timer and some scripture on the screen, and I want to invite all of us to reflect. And if you're taking communion, go ahead and eat and drink when you're ready. Thanks for tuning in again to Suncrest On Demand as we wrap up the red letters. Listen, join us next week because we are kicking off back to school season with so much fun stuff. Head to suncrest.org to learn all of the details. If you liked this video, go ahead and hit the like button. If you know someone who could use a listen to this, hit the share button. And if you want to hear more content from Suncrest Church, hit subscribe. We'll see you all next time as we kick off Grown-Up Prayers. In fact, here's a quick preview of what that's all about.
Dear God, are you a ninja? Is that why I can't see you?
Dear God, please change the taste of asparagus. It's grass. Thanks.
Dear God, if you give me a genie lamp like Aladdin, I will give you anything you want, except my money or my chess set.
Dear God, did you mean for the giraffe to look like that, or was it an accident?